All right, folks, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. Greetings to everyone. Thank you for sharing and devoting a little bit of your precious time to this day, this long anticipated day, our forum on navigating justice, new data-driven approaches to public safety. We could not be more excited. This is a day that is over a decade in the making. So for those of you who are new to the Center for Policing Equity, let me give you a little bit of a background on us and how we ended up here with this day. Center for Policing Equity is the world's largest research and action organization on racial justice in public safety. I say that as a super humble brag because up until last summer, the space was entirely too small, especially in the nonprofit version of that. We got our start in 2007. We're formally a thing in 2008. We forged the National Justice Database, which is the world's largest collection of police behavioral data in the world, in 2013 with a National Science Foundation grant that we applied for in 2012 in the wake of Trayvon Martin's killing. But I'll tell you what we really are, and what we tell people about is we're the justice nerds. Our job is to make public safety less deadly, less racist, and make policing less omnipresent. The need for crisis response less omnipresent. The goal is to make sure that communities have the resources they need to manage the things that they need to keep themselves safe and to equip communities, law enforcement, electeds with the tools that can accomplish that. Very often right now in our national politics, we listen to people in ways that make it feel like, how could we ever find any kind of collaboration? But I'll tell you, in the language of activists and protesters, I hear we ask law enforcement to do too much. We should give more power to communities. For the last 20 years of doing this work, I've heard from law enforcement, stop asking us to do too much. We need to empower communities. The disinvestment that we've seen, particularly in Black and brown communities throughout the history of this country, has resulted in systems where we over-rely on punishment and under-rely on the genius that exists in that community, in those communities, that we cannot benefit from because of that lack of investment. We're in a moment where we can start to change that. And the Justice Navigator product, which we're going to show to you today, is a step in that direction. So when we got started doing this work, me and my co-founder, Dr. Tracy Cassie, who at the time was a commander in the Denver Police Department, said there's so little that's being done on anything other than crime. So little being done on equity, so little being done on what communities need, that a science of public safety is necessary. And if we give that back to communities and their law enforcement partners, we can start to make a change. So each department we walked into, Denver, San Jose, Salt Lake City, all the early departments, what we thought was if they had better information, they could do better. But each one was bespoke. We would show up, communities would say, we want this, law enforcement would say, we want the other. We would try and create a package for that. And it turns out when you do everything bespoke, it's tiring. It takes a long time. And oftentimes things have evolved. So we figured out, in fact, that there are a set of analyses that we almost always end up doing. And we decided we were going to focus on those so we could scale up and give those away to communities, law enforcement, and their partners to make communities safer, to give back the information that would allow us to do a kind of performance management for justice. Well, when you start doing that in each individual police department, it takes you somewhere between 12 and 24 months just to clean the data. Because policing data, public safety data are terrible. It's not a personal slight. It's not shade on anyone individually. We as a nation have allowed for policing data to be some of the worst data we've gotten in any municipality. So then these folks at this place that you might have heard of came along. It's called Google. If I'm introducing it to you, congratulations on waking up for your 20-year coma. Google came along and said, we have these things called engineers and they work magic. And so in the first immersion that we had, which I believe was 2017, that first immersion that we had, they showed up and they helped us to build a set of systems that would automate the cleaning, the standardizing, and the auditing of police behavioral data, particularly pedestrian stops, vehicle stops, and use of force. The things that communities wanted to know: how unfair, how fair, how much is it law enforcement's fault, the things I don't like about this. So instead of taking 12 to 24 months, we got it down to about 24 hours to clean once we got it set up the right kind of way. And that means we can start to scale things. When we're done with that, all of that sweat, all of the 10 Googlers who showed up, from product engineers to software engineers, all kinds of engineers, product designers and program managers, all of the folks, when they were done, we had an engine that could clean it, but we were still writing paper reports. Sometimes we would send them in the very high-tech technology of PDF. And it turns out that's not the easiest way to share, not just with law enforcement, but with communities who want to get their hands dirty in not just the data itself, which don't speak, but in the analyses. Because if a community is experiencing police use of force, such that Black folks are 4 times more likely than white folks to experience use of force incidents, how much of that is driven by the disinvestment in Black communities as opposed to police officer behaviors or police department policies? That may sound like it's scientific, academic mumbo jumbo, but I'll tell you what we're really talking about here is, where is the accountability? Where does responsibility need to go? And what can I do to fix it most quickly? And there's no Black community that's not interested in finding the answer to that. So you need to sometimes use science to get the best kinds of policy. That's what our reports are supposed to do. And we want to give that as directly and as transparently to the folks who most need it, those communities and the folks on the ground doing the work. So today, what we're here to talk about is a portal that'll allow us to do that, to give away not just the data, but the analytics directly to the people who can most directly implement it, understand it, who are closest to the problem, which means they're closest to the solutions. We just need to give them the tools to do that. And these are the tools that those communities have asked for. In the last year and a half, you'd have to be, again, unconscious, both literally and metaphorically, not to understand that public safety has reemerged as one of the top public policy domains of the country. And you've heard lots of people talking about old solutions and new solutions. Lots of folks angry at the people who are not talking about their solutions. And at the Center for Policing Equity, and me just being a Black man for almost my entire life, there's that week I took off in college, but beyond that, straight through, I gotta say, it's not my problems that I'm trying to solve. It's the problems of the communities that have been most disinvested in. I've been incredibly fortunate, even as a Black man, to walk through this life and get next to halls of power. Doesn't mean I haven't had my own Black experiences, great and troubling as they have been. But if I'm not trying to solve my problems, I shouldn't be listening just to my voice. So when we work in those communities, what they say is, give us the tools to say how bad it is, to understand that it's not so bad as we thought, and to get leverage on how we change it. The tools that we're going to be talking about today are the tools that our community partners, the folks who live in those communities that are most blighted by crime, most blighted by violence in the midst of this unprecedented murder spike, the tools that they want. Not more punishment, not more forgetting about them, the tools to empower them to deliver to themselves the communities that keep them safe. So today, what we're going to see are the tools that they've asked for, that collectively, in partnership with our Google partners, we've been able to create. I could not be more excited to share this with you. My excitement is so high that I shouldn't be the one talking. Let me turn things over to our Chief Operating Officer and President, Dirk Butler, to begin the panel. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this moment with us.
Thank you so much, Phil, for that introduction and welcome, and for your very poignant words, which I'm sure ring true for so many of us on this call. It's a wonderful day. It's a very important day. It's a very joyous day for justice nerds everywhere. And thank you, all of you, for joining us today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we're going to spend our time together today. The session will begin with a preview of the Justice Navigator platform. We're extremely excited for you all to see just this really great, innovative software at work. And then we'll then hear from our esteemed panelists, and they'll talk about their experiences using data and science to advocate for changes in public safety and racial inequalities. We'll then have a chance for you all to ask questions of the panel after the panel discussion. So please make sure you submit any questions that you think you may have via the Q&A box that's provided with the chat. So, as I said, today we're excited to debut the Justice Navigator, a tool that increases the transparency of law enforcement data and enables communities to hold their police departments accountable. How do we get here? How did we get to this really historic moment? As you heard Phil talk about the National Justice Database city reports, the Justice Navigator was birthed out of those. We tried to figure out a way to take those to scale, to reach as many folks as we possibly could with the important data and information that they needed for their communities. So as you also heard Phil talk a little bit about, we began a 6-month immersion of 14 Google staffers, which Mob, who you'll hear from, and she's going to discuss more in detail, really helped us build out this vision for community and for community stakeholders and for public safety as a whole. The synthesis and the outcome of all of this is the Justice Navigator that you're going to get today. So what is the Justice Navigator? Well, it's a platform for delivering the Center for Policing Equity's targeted analysis to communities and law enforcement agencies. It's a resource to support community and law enforcement in making data-informed changes and reimagining the way public safety can be in their communities. It puts the power of data into the hands of stakeholders and community where it belongs, right? So that actionable change can occur. How do we deliver on this mission? Well, it validates community members' experiences of burdensome and biased policing, right? It actually puts the data in the hands of those that need it the most to give voice to their experiences and to legitimize their experiences in a way that has never been able to be done before. It confirms that disparities persist and do exist, even when we account for common explanations. It provides insight into areas that warrant additional investigation and provides resources to help communities and law enforcement take action. So it provides a pathway to action. Well, so with all that being said, I'm just excited and ecstatic to hand it over to my colleague, Camille Beckles, our product manager here at the Center for Policing Equity for the Justice Navigator Project, to give a demo of the platform. Camille?
All right, thank you, Dirk. All right, so you all should be seeing the Justice Navigator now. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the platform for you. So right on the landing page here, you'll see as you're scrolling down through the landing page, we've got our assessments front and center. We've got a welcome video with a little bit of an intro about how to use the Justice Navigator. And also there's a contact us feature at the bottom. You can sign up here to be alerted about when we have new assessments and resources available. So we had a few goals in mind when we were partnering with google.org to design this platform. Some of those included scale, accessibility, and actionability. We want to make sure that what is in the platform and what is in the assessments is usable, and that it doesn't just sit on a shelf, but that what the information we have here makes it out into the world so that we can see real change in public safety and real equity achieved in public safety. There's two primary components to the Justice Navigator. The first is the assessments, which is where the data analyses live. And the second is supporting companion content to help people take action on those assessments. So right on the first page here, you'll see we've got the assessments front and center. Right now, we've got Sacramento and San Diego as our two publicly available cities, and over time, we'll add more as they become available. I'm going to walk us through the sample city assessment to show you how the assessments work before I walk through the companion content. So firstly, there's a few different ways to navigate through the Justice Navigator. We've got this sort of tab navigation at the top. And that divides out the platform according to the different analysis types that we've done. So we've got use of force, vehicle stops, and pedestrian stops. And then we also have a section for departmental context, which talks about the residential demographics within a particular city, as well as officer demographics for that particular police department. We've also got a data notes tab on the last tab here, which shows how CPE managed the variables that were provided to us by departments and the different transformations that our data analysis team had to make in order to standardize those variables for analysis. And then we, of course, have our summary of findings, which is the main landing page. Additionally, within each tab, we've got a table of contents. So if you click on any of these hyperlinks, it'll navigate you down to that section. So we really wanted to make sure that there were a number of different ways to make your way around the platform for ease of use. On the scale front, there are some things going on this summary of findings page and throughout the platform that are not readily available to the user. One thing that I'll point out is we've got text automation, which means that on this summary page, each of these bullet points that you're seeing here are generated based on automated thresholds that our analysis team has put together based on what sorts of results we would expect to see for a given analysis. And that pulls the key findings into this summary page here so that there's less manual intervention required. And that ideally will allow us to create more of these assessments over time and also more quickly so we can get them into the hands of communities and our partner law enforcement agencies. So diving into some of the accessibility features on this page, if you look at any of the summary points, you'll see they've got these carrots here. So you can see the key takeaway right here on this front page, but also if you click down into the summary, you'll actually see the supporting visualization that ties up into that page. So everything that you need to know about the assessment is included on this kind of first page, but if you want to do a deeper dive, you can click this details button, and that'll navigate you to the specific location within the assessment from that summary page. So also on this page, we have something that we've called progressive storytelling. So you land on a slide, and this is kind of the key takeaway for that particular analysis. But if you want to learn more about how we got to that finding, you can navigate through this carousel, and it'll show you all of the supporting analyses that we did to get to that main landing point. We also have a number of other accessibility and interactivity features built in. So we've got tooltips over certain analyses. So if you hover in this example, you'll see the number of incident counts that tie up into each of these percentages. We also have different filters available. So I'm going to navigate now to another analysis type. And here you'll see we've got an analysis that shows rates of use of force incidents after we've accounted for neighborhood crime rates and poverty levels and the share of Black residents. So this is the landing point for this analysis, but you'll notice that underneath this analysis, we have these different caption points. And if you click these, it's actually going to filter out to show you the different results for different groups of people. So you can see we have Latinx showing now. If I click on Native people, it'll show you the results for Native people. Another example of this filtering is if I go to our vehicle stops page, go down to work unit, you can see in this analysis, there's quite a lot of activity for unit 1 and unit 3. If I'm looking at this and I really want to drill down more closely on those particular work units, I can click that filter, and it's going to kind of gray out those other 2 work units and really highlight the ones that are of the most interest in this particular case. We also wanted to make sure on the actionable front that these don't just sit on a shelf. And so we've built in a few different features to make these easier to share. One of those is this copy link to chart button. So if I click that and then I open a new tab and I paste that in, it's going to navigate me right to that specific analysis. So let's say that I'm a police chief and I want to investigate units 1 and units 3 because I see there's more activity there. I can share that information very easily with the stakeholders who are interested. It's also available to share on social media. So let's say that there's a finding of particular interest for a community member, you can drop that link into social media and have folks navigate directly to that specific space. And then kind of transitioning into more of that actionable front, in addition to the assessments themselves, We also have a lot of supporting content that exists outside of the data analysis. And right within this same ecosystem, you can see at the top navigation here, we have two sections, one for communities and one for law enforcement. So on the community section, we have a number of different resources here that help to explain CPE's framework for taking action, as well as our recommendations for how to move certain work forward. We've got these different sections about how to collect data, how to implement targeted interventions. We also want to make sure that we are not only speaking in kind of statistics speak. And so we've made attempts to clarify various terms that we use throughout our assessments with the glossary of terms. There's also a section here for understanding your department and various infographics to explain the history of policing, but also ways to concretely take action in understanding your local law enforcement agency. And then similarly, on the law enforcement side, we also have supporting tools here. So again, different infographics explaining how to measure and monitor, identifying risk factors, how to investigate the things that are located within the assessments. And we also have actionable tools. So an example within the share results page here is that, let's say that you've got an assessment and you are ready to share those findings. We have worksheets built into the platform. So an example is how to issue a press release. And that opens up a worksheet that you can download, work through with your department, with other stakeholders to really get this work out into the world and not just have it live on the desks of a few people. Similarly, we have information about how to effectively engage with the community and a whole resources section down here, like 5 do's and don'ts for hosting community events that, again, will open up a different worksheet with CPE's recommendations and best practices for moving this work forward. So both within the assessments themselves and within the platform, whether or not a city has a particular Justice Navigator assessment, we've tried our best to make this accessible, easy to use, and most importantly, shareable and actionable for both communities as well as our law enforcement agencies as well. So that's a very high level view of the platform. And with that, I will turn it back over to Dirk to take us into the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Camille. So exciting, so exciting. Thank you for running us through that. And again, want to remind everyone, if you have questions about the Justice Navigator, please put them in the chat and hang on after the panel to get answers to those questions. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our esteemed panel that are going to discuss much of their experiences with working with data to transform community. While we believe here at the Center for Policing Equity that the Justice Navigator will play an important role in creating greater transparency and accountability, we also know that we can't transform and redesign public safety alone. And there's much more work to be done beyond the data. And to that end, I'm excited again to welcome our 3 esteemed panelists who will talk about their experiences spearheading and supporting data-driven change and speak about how they use data to make change in their communities and in their work. So first, I have Maab Ibrahim. Maab is the Racial Justice Grant-Making Lead at Google.org, a data-driven, human-focused philanthropy powered by Google. Through a unique blend of funding, products, and technical expertise from Google volunteers, she accelerates the progress of nonprofits that use data science and innovative new approaches to advance social justice. Welcome, Maab. Next up, I have Andrea St. Julian. Andrea is an attorney whose 30-year practice focuses on federal and state civil and criminal appeals. As a board member of the Earl B. Gilliam Bar Association and the ACLU, San Diego and Imperial Counties, Andrea is active in the community, working on such projects as the San Diego Participatory Defense Group and the Coalition for Police Accountability and Transparency. Please welcome Andrea. And finally, we have Mr. Russell Bloom. Russell Bloom is the Independent Police Auditor at the BART Office of the Independent Police Auditor, OIPA. Mr. Bloom came to OIPA as an investigator in 2014 after working as an in-house investigator at an Oakland, California civil litigation firm. Mr. Bloom has also served on the Berkeley, California Police Review Commission, including terms as vice chair and chair. Again, welcome to all our panelists. So I want to begin by getting some context about your backgrounds and what brings you to this work. Can you talk a bit about your work and the ways it has intersected with data and tech? Let's start, Mr. Bloom, with you.
Thank you, Dirk. Thanks for the opportunity to be here to talk about this exciting new platform. In the BART office of the Independent Police Auditor, where we are primarily a complaint-driven investigative agency with several other areas of authority, but that's one of our priorities. We're particularly reliant on data to alert us to the areas of policing and the areas of police oversight specifically that require the most attention and require the most work. So our oversight model allows us to have unfettered access to all the data and information that are collected by the police department that we oversee. So we're able to see and detect any troubling patterns and see what's developing. And then because of that direct access, we're able to dive more deeply into individual sort of granular incident review, which we can more deeply examine. And that's something that you mentioned earlier, Dirk, is that opportunity to identify areas that require more attention. And so that is one of the ways, the primary ways in which we are reliant on data in doing our work. And this also allows us to assess whether there are training or policy implications sort of beyond an individual contact or incident. And the data allows us to distribute the information that we've discovered to the people that we serve. So that's key. It's important that the people we serve are able to see both what we and the police department are doing or have done to address their concerns. And the data can show us clearly whether those efforts are having any impact on policing or on improving policing. And it can show us whether our efforts or the police department's efforts are moving us backward or forward. So really important to be able to have these data sets and have accessible data sets so that the conversations can be real and based on perceptions. This is how we direct our energy and our resources. And if we learn through data analysis that we're not fulfilling our mission, our police oversight mission, or our commitments to our communities, well, then we have to redirect our efforts. And so very important for us to have a very healthy and consistent interaction with all of the available data. Obviously, analyzed data in the form of the Justice Navigator makes it even easier for us to access that and to share that information. So community engagement is another very important piece for us, and it looks like the tool provides some opportunities to expand that as well, which is fantastic.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Russell. Andrea, same question.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate being here. I think this is a very important discussion, very excited about it. So what brought me to this work? I have to say it was just the bottom line, the pain and injustice that I saw in my community. I just couldn't stand by and watch that without becoming even more active in doing that. And as I became more active, I realized that there are a lot of different forms of advocacy, and that my training as an appellate attorney was one form of advocacy that was really sorely missing from the movement forward. And so that really fueled me to become even more involved. What I concentrate on in my work is shaping and writing local legislation. And data is absolutely crucial to being able to do that. In the first instance, it identifies what the problems are, and it helps you understand exactly how to attack those problems. You really can't do that very effectively without data. Also, data is extremely important because it is a tool for communication. When I go and meet with elected officials and have to talk to them about the issues, data is the language that they understand best. When I am speaking to the community and getting information from them and we're looking at what the issues and problems are, again, data is a really important communication tool. And so that's one of the reasons why I think what CPE and Google have done is very important.
Thank you so much. Maab, same question. How does your work and in what ways have it intersected with data tech?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I think this is a critical conversation, and with over 300 of you all joining, I think you agree that the time to have the conversation is now. As Dirk mentioned, I'm joining from google.org, which is Google's philanthropy. And as our racial justice grant-making lead, I'm tasked with informing Google's charitable support of nonprofits that are advancing justice. Personally, I happened to join Google during the summer of 2015, which you might remember had a number of tragedies that put a national spotlight on racial justice, on criminal justice, on policing, from the Charleston church shootings to the murder of Alton Sterling and Philandro Castile, and of course, the thousands of incidents that also didn't make national headlines, but continued to fuel reform across the country. But it was around that time that google.org joined forces with our Black Googler network and justice-minded employees to think through how we as a company could leverage not just our philanthropy, but our people power to support the brilliance of nonprofits and community leaders who are already doing work in communities to advance justice, and particularly those who are from our most over-policed Black and Brown communities. Because we know that policing disparities are not new, that movements in resistance to systemic racism and the over-policing of our communities have existed since even before the founding of this country. And in 2015, google.org launched a portfolio that has now grown into over $40 million in grants and 15,000 pro bono hours of employee engagements dedicated to criminal justice reform. Given our mission, the majority of our work has focused on closing data gaps and measuring disparities across policing, prosecuting, and prisons. But CPE was our very first criminal justice data science grantee, and we've been supporting in significant ways ever since. I can say that they are not only the subject matter experts on racism and policing, but what stood out for me is the role that they've been playing in being a pivotal voice, calling for the centering of the most directly impacted folks in this work and encouraging law enforcement voluntarily to increase policing data transparency. As a grant manager, I can't tell you how rare it is to find organizations that do all three of these things extremely well, in addition to the data analysis and the super nerdy stuff too. But I'm very excited to be here today on the launch of the Justice Navigator, and thank everyone for joining.
Excellent, thank you. Bob, we're actually going to stay with you for our next question. Based on your background, are there any aspects of the Justice Navigator that really stand out for you?
Oh, sure. The Justice Navigator was developed in 2020, and I think the environment we were in at that time, really deeply informed the product roadmap. After the murder of George Floyd, I can remember CPE using its platform, and of course, it had just won the TED Audacious Prize, exposing them to a whole new audience of supporters, and they leveraged that platform to insist that the people who care about policing issues follow the lead of grassroots organizations and organizers on the ground from over-policed communities. And I think that was a very pivotal moment. For the first time, over 50% of Americans were in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, were taken to the streets, the largest social movement that we've seen in decades. And what stands out to me is that the Justice Navigator is taking CPE a long way from its early days producing static reports, primarily sent to police chiefs in the form of an actionable PDF, and making it super interactive. And so when we started supporting CPE in 2017, it was alongside this initiative called Project Lifesaver, which I mentioned was in collaboration between the Black Googler Network, google.org, and justice-minded employees. After we made that first grant, we decided to do something completely new, which was to send members of the group, engineers, user researchers, product managers, to CPE for the first time, full-time for 6 weeks. And together alongside that team, they worked to improve the National Justice Statistics Database and how it cleaned its data. The result of that work was that CPE cut the time it takes to clean the data down from months to hours. And we're learning from our grantees, just as much as they're learning from what we contribute technically. So we improved on the program and the processes. We sent a second round of employees, the 14 Googlers who helped to develop the Justice Navigator that you're seeing today. And we developed this infrastructure called the Google Fellowship. We do about 10 of them across all of our portfolios each year. And through this fellowship, we took what was a off-the-shelf solution for CPE. They were using Tableau to visualize the data, and changed that to a custom platform that we're celebrating today that allows a lot more visibility and accessibility into the data. So we're really proud of the work that the Googlers have done. I know many of them are tuned in today. So congratulations, very, very excited to be representing your work, and now the work continues.
Excellent, thank you, and welcome to all of them. Without question, we are very appreciative of the work here at CPE. Andrea, same question. What stands out for you about the Justice Navigator?
A lot of things stand out for me. One of them is I wish I had had something like this years ago when I was fighting our most recent fight. So I am the founder and co-chair of San Diegans for Justice. And that is an organization that fought for years to create a robust commission to oversee the San Diego City Police Department. And during those 5-6 years, when we were fighting tooth and nail, I mean, we were betrayed, sabotaged, lied on, undermined every step of the way. And one of the ways that we were lied on was with information and attacking data, okay? And so we would have to come back and say, well, no, the facts that you're trying to put out there aren't correct. This is the real data. This is the real information. And so having a tool where you can easily find information and data to fight against the attacks, it's really important. And there are even more subtle attacks. For example, when you first go to an elected official and say, there's a problem here, we need to make change, the first thing they ask you for is the data, right? And so data is one of those entry tickets. You're not going to be able to get very far into the discussion or into the fight unless you pull out your data ticket. Now, let's be really clear. They don't really care about the data. They just want to use it as a way of stopping you from going forward, right? But you still need that data ticket. And in a less cynical way, you need the data ticket because you need to inform yourself of how you want to move forward. Data is real and valuable in a substantive sense, but your opponents want to misuse that. And that's another reason why you have to have the data. You have to be able to know how to use the data, but you also have to know and realize when you have to put a stop on your opponent's misuse of the data. Once you bring forward data and once you help people understand, okay, we've given you anecdotal information, we came back and we gave you all the data, now it's time to move on. Now it's time to actually make change. And you can't let elected officials and your opponents use data in a way to try to stop you from moving forward and just getting mired in the data, okay? You have to say enough is enough. We are post data at this point. We brought it all to you. Now let's talk about solutions. you know? And again, the data, if you use it in a positive way, is important in that way because you can use it to inform what your solution should be. And it's very important in speaking to larger communities so that they can understand what you're trying to do and what needs to be done. So I think it's important to put, to elevate the importance of data in its proper place, but you've got to also be very wary about other people misusing the existence of data.
Yeah, definitely, without question. Thank you for that. Russell, to you as well. What stands out for you with the Justice Navigator platform?
Thanks, Dirk. And, you know, I think right off the bat, I want to agree with a lot of what has already been said. And in particular, Andrea talks about data as an entree to sort of an informed discussion. And that's really an important piece to me. I think that our approach to doing our oversight work and our reform work is really rooted in open listening and learning from the people that we serve. And I think being able to distribute data in a way that's accessible for everybody really at least begins to put us more on even footing as we're having real conversations about how to mitigate problems instead of bickering over identifying the problems or the existence of problems. And so it puts us a step closer to actual solutions. And so that's sort of a big picture takeaway. And if we're looking at the product itself and the platform, you know, just the simplicity of the user interface is a big deal to me. You know, I'm not of the youngest generation, and so interface is important to me. It needs to be intuitive to a person of a certain age, and intuitive and accessible and available to everybody really who's impacted by policing. And so I think that's what stood out to me right off the bat, and I really appreciated that. But just the opportunity to be engaged and to drill down further and look at actual numbers beyond the percentages, beyond the bar charts, for people who want to understand, you know, more about any particular assertion or anything that the automation generates. It gives you the opportunity to look much more deeply at how the automation arrived at those solutions, which is, I think, an amazing function. You know, engagement, public participation, because they're such important pieces of accountability efforts, this Justice Navigator seems like it's going to be able to enhance the quality of those conversations and that work in a lot of different ways. And I think the other piece that I just wanted to mention was the guidance that the Justice Navigator provides in terms of how to conduct outreach efforts in a way that's effective and respectful. And I think that's like the gravy on top. So being able to get some guidance about how to better engage and better learn from the people we serve is always a welcome feature. So that's my takeaway.
Excellent. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Ma'a, let's move to another question. Google.org played a central role in the development of this product, as has been stated prior. Could you talk a little bit about why Google is supporting efforts to build products like the Justice Navigator?
Sure. So sort of talking through the Justice Navigator as an example, right? Last year, we sent the second round of employees to CPE through the Google.org Fellowship. They're tasked with a 6-month project full-time, where they have special manager approvals to be now working with the center to improve the digital reports that CPE was producing using Tableau. And the Googlers did work, you know, to improve those reports, which were mostly static, but they also saw an opportunity for CPE to take a bigger step by reviewing the product goals here and ultimately creating the Justice Navigator as an interactive platform. You know, and then they conducted the user research to define the needs of a diverse set of users who could then leverage this data differently, from police chiefs to, you know, community groups to policymakers, and get started on the back-end code and recommended, you know, user interfaces to make it useful and make it as accessible as possible. To me, I think this is what Google and google.org are doing when they're at their very best. And it allows organizations to make and adapt to the times that we're in a moment, to make these tools as useful as possible. Like going back to your question, Dirk, about what stands out to me with this platform, it takes CPE a long way from the early days of producing a static report that's primarily sent to a police chief in the form of like an actionable PDF. Being interactive makes it a whole lot more accessible. You all are prioritizing police departments that are committed to making the data public and more transparent, and doing some voluntarily and in partnership, which is very important. And then there are new features that make the product more friendly for community, to reinforce what people already know is going on in their neighborhoods. So I know that the Google team, is really hoping to provide these groups with a tool that can alleviate some of the personal risk and frankly, the burden that Black and Brown folk face and constantly having to do this work, which is of course, exhausting work, but getting folks to believe them when they say that them or their neighbor have been profiled or assaulted or unjustly murdered, places it within the context of patterns and numbers and data on racial disparities. And that's what we're really excited about. Philanthropy is very important, but philanthropy plus employee talent can be a true game changer. And it's important to work with organizations that can really leverage, those 6 months, that window of time that we're able to get the talent and resources over to take the work that you're already doing really well and just, leapfrog, take it to the next level.
Without question, I think you hit the nail right on the head in terms of seeing how philanthropy and innovate and giving and expertise can create innovation that can change lives, and it's a wonderful thing. Russell, in January, BART publicly released a set of analyses done by CPE, conducted on BART stops and use of force data. And these analyses in that report are similar to the analyses that we conduct with the Justice Navigator. So I would love to if you could speak a bit about how the Office of the Independent Police Auditor has made the BART analyses from CPE or data and research more generally. How have you used those analyses?
Absolutely. And, I think we've touched on the ways that we're able to use data to inform conversations. And that really has been, from my perspective, one of the sort of biggest, most important pieces of receiving the report from CPE in January. And it is of the type that is static, the type that Maab referred to earlier. So it's not in the Justice Navigator format, but nevertheless, it gave us an opportunity to publicly discuss the outcomes and publicly discuss the analyses that were provided. And again, unstick the process, to have all stakeholders who are engaged in discussions about policy reform, practice, training, to be able to start at the same point where we have a basic understanding about what the data show and what our efforts can be to mitigate some of the problematic or troubling outcomes, I think was able to move us much farther down the road. And it's, maybe leverage is overstating it, but to be able to be in the room with decision makers and not be stuck in the realm of anecdote or personal experience or unsupported perception. Again, it's, I think, easier for people who are in the position of pulling the levers or making the decisions to resist the opportunity to do that until there's proof. And proof comes often in the form of data. And the report we got from CPE was more than just raw data. It also provided analysis of those data, and it also provided specific recommendations for moving forward with addressing some of the outcomes that we were seeing, the racially disparate outcomes in policing that we were seeing specifically. So the ability to unstick conversations has been one of the most important pieces, important takeaways of getting the CPE report back in January. I want to also add that, you know, when we have access to a methodical approach to data collection, when we're able to show the ways in which the data were put together, we're then able to more quickly begin to mitigate the problems. And when we're talking about policing, and when we're talking about use of force, and we're talking about entanglement in the criminal justice system, time is of the essence. And every single person that is entangled that shouldn't be, that's a big problem for that person and their family and that community. So being able to sort of cut to the chase because we have the report has been extremely valuable from my perspective as the independent police auditor.
Thank you so much. So I want to ask the group, one of the ultimate goals of the Justice Navigator is to bring about more transparency and accountability. As three people working to change public safety and racial inequalities, what steps can be taken to ensure data like we're provided in the Justice Navigator doesn't sit on the shelf and actually results in action and gets used? And Andrea, let's start with you.
Yeah, San Diegans for Justice is as boots on the ground as you can get. So this is a very appropriate question for us. There is so much that we need, and we have, again, so few resources, right? So that's why tools like this are extremely important for us. I think the way that you can always remain relevant is keeping in touch and getting input and feedback from people who use the Justice Navigator. Our needs are enormous as boots on the ground organizations, and we will tell you exactly what we need, you know, and as long as you're willing to listen and see what you can do to adjust the Justice Navigator as time goes on to meet those needs, I think the Justice Navigator will be wildly successful.
Exactly. Thank you. Russell, same question.
For us, I think that the big picture, and I think that's what I want to focus on, is if I take a step back and I look at the ways in which Justice Navigator can actually help us advance mission, right? What we look at on a day-to-day basis is often very small moments in time and very specific or discrete engagements between police officers and the people they serve. And within a transit system, often that's related to fare evasion enforcement efforts and other sort of what we call low-level criminal conduct. I think what I'd like everybody to take away from my part of this discussion is that we can use these data to look so much more closely at the low-level conduct and the low-level interactions and understand where are our opportunities to interrupt a path toward a more tragic outcome, like the death of Oscar Grant in 2009, which really was the impetus for the creation of our oversight system. And so really looking at the ways in which all of these different parts work together is critically important for me, and to elevate the fact that focusing very carefully on things that don't have tragic outcomes is our entree into preventing those tragic outcomes. And I think this tool gives us a better way to discuss how we can have that impact.
Excellent. And lastly, Maab, how do we ensure that data doesn't sit on the shelf? This actually results in action for communities?
You know, from the technical perspective, I think it's really important to keep these tools simple, targeted, transparent, helpful, continuing to do the user research to make the product as useful as possible in the hands of decision makers. And that can be policymakers, law enforcement agencies, community groups. But in previous iterations of the National Justice Databases assessments, they were much more dense and much harder to find the information that a particular user might need in an instance. And now this Justice Navigator tool is allowing you to segment so that you can absorb that top level analysis. And if you're a decision maker, but also dig deeper if you want to play with the data. If you're, let's say, a law enforcement data analyst or specialist, and that's really important that you understand why people are coming to this tool and what they're looking for. The user experience researchers at Google who helped to develop the tool also provided significant updates to the copy and the language to make it more concise. I think about like 40% more concise than previous reports. And that will really help with making it digestible to a wider range of audiences across reading levels. And I know that the CPE engineering team is extremely committed to making this product continue to stay relevant and as useful as possible. So we'll continue to see those improvements.
Awesome. Excellent, excellent. So I know we want to leave some time for some questions and answers. We're running up on time. So I'm going to welcome Camille back in as well. The keeper of the questions, do we have some time to answer for the panelists and for Camille to answer some questions?
I am the keeper of the questions. So the first one that I think is applicable to the group is interest groups have a huge presence in the US politics, making it difficult for folks like scientists, data-driven organizations, et cetera, to be heard in directing public policy. So if each of the panelists can talk about any barriers that they faced in terms of pursuing data-driven transformations, or if you've come up against moneyed interest from legislators or in other directions in terms of you presenting data that shows racial inequities, but there's been basically, what's the counter to a CPE? And in terms of money, what's a counter to a Google? And how have you tackled those challenges?
Yeah, and Andrea, you're nodding, so I think you want to get in on this one. So please. Feel.
Oh yeah, have I encountered opposition? Oh my goodness, yes. And just to start out, I think with the beginning of the question, I very much agree that there is this chasm between boots on the ground organizations and people who are doing academic. And that is a chasm that has just got to be filled. One of the things that we did here in San Diego through the ACLU is we, a summit where we had organizations meet with academics. So we could talk about the incredible research that they had and how useful that is in terms of moving forward. So you've got to create some kind of system for interaction between organizations and academics. Yes, you will always encounter opposition, and data can be used as a tool to fight that. Because usually you have very moneyed interests. I was going up against the police officers union. You will not find unions that are more powerful or moneyed than that. All right. And let me tell you, we had no money. All right. I mean, no money. Okay. Now, I want to say this had a happy ending. I think I keep leaving people hanging. After this 5 or 6 years of work, we were able to finally get it on the ballot. And we won with 75% of the vote in San Diego, which is not that radical, shall we say, of a county. In fact, we won with a higher percentage of the vote than any elected official, any measure, any proposition in our entire county. Okay, so my point is, it shows that when you have nothing, and I'm really, we had no money. Okay, we just had heart, a lot of heart and a lot of hard work. So it is possible to do that when you are doing the right thing. And I know this sounds simplistic, but that always has to be your bottom line. You have to work for the community. You have to do the right thing. You have to leverage what data you have available to you, and you have to keep going no matter how much money the other side is throwing.
I'll jump in to add that, I think the opposite of opposition is collaboration, and that an organization like CPE, in between the launches of these incredible products and all of the relational work that you're doing to get law enforcement engaged, hosting convenings like the Science of Justice convening that you all did just a few years back, that brought hundreds of community members, researchers, academic, boots on the ground, policymakers, like governors, mayors together in the room, and made us sit in workshops and talk about the conversations that we're having in silos. That is incredibly important, and the energy is there to do the work. So I'm personally extremely excited for when I can see you all again, all 300 of you in person. But I know that the energy is there to do the work.
Wonderful. Excellent. Lucy, do we have time for one more question?
Yes, I think we do. And so this relates to the question of accessibility. So I think also Camille can jump in here. It says, data is super important, but to preserve data and to keep it accessible, look, how are the panelists working to make data accessible for various populations who may not be college educated or have backgrounds? So I'm guessing this relates to like different types of strategies for visualizations. And are there organizations, I'm assuming in addition to CPE, working on data translation to make it easier to understand how any data is collected?
So I can jump in from a product standpoint to give some info about that. So from an accessibility standpoint and understanding the content, Mab touched on this a bit during the user testing and user experience research that Google.org led. Part of that was talking to people who are using the platform across different user groups. So it wasn't just law enforcement agencies, it wasn't just government actors, it wasn't just academics. We also talked to community activists working in a variety of different fields, from incarceration to policing to public health. And so in having those conversations, one of the things that we really tried to focus on with our content was making sure that the way that we were writing things up was accessible. CPE is a science organization where we are justice nerds at our core, to use kind of a key phrase from the organization. But we wanted to make sure that we weren't only speaking in statistics terms. And so we've got, as I showed during the demo, a glossary of terms to kind of help clarify a lot of the content that's in the Justice Navigator. We also are evaluating the visualizations and ways to make those more easily accessible and easier to interpret, so that you don't have to do a super deep dive if you're not as familiar with data interpretation or with statistics or things like that. And then we also have different tools kind of built in to the platform itself to help people get the information out there. So part of the reason why we wanted this to be a digital platform is to make sure that it didn't just live in, a piece of paper on somebody's desk, but that we could distribute that more easily to the impacted communities. So those are some of the ways from a product standpoint, and also just from a content development standpoint, that we have tried to take into account the different audiences and making sure that the information in the Justice Navigator is accessible and useful to the key audiences.
Dirk, could I add a little something to that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, please do. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so this is again an example of where you start shutting your opportunity down. All right. CPE is a highly respected organization. Google, a highly respected and competent organization. When people start asking questions about, well, this and that, you shut them down and you say, listen, I'm not going to go down this data rabbit hole with you, right? This is the data. It is very clear. Now let's talk about solutions. So yeah, this is one of those things where you really have to shut people down on that.
Definitely. I think we are at time. This has just been a fantastic conversation. I've so much enjoyed it. Just a marvelous panel. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, Andrea, as well as Russell. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time, energy, and partnership. We truly appreciate it. And I think I speak for CP when I say just thank you. I want to remind everyone that the Justice Navigator is now live and can be accessed at justicenavigator.org. And if there are any questions about how you can become more involved, please reach out to us at justicenavigator@policingequity.org. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Be safe, be well, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.